So today we're going to be talking about gun control. Now, gun control isn't much of a debate anymore here in Australia, but it is a really big debate in America, and a lot of gun control advocates in America look to Australia as a sort of model for what they want America to look like.
The Australian government, as part of trying to clamp down on the availability of automatic weapons, offered a good price for buying hundreds of thousands of guns, and then they basically clamped down going forward. I think it would be worth considering doing it on the national level if that could be arranged.
So a little background into Australia's gun laws. In 1996, a 28-year-old man named Martin Bryant went on a rampage in Port Arthur. Armed with a semi-automatic rifle, he killed 35 people and left 23 wounded. Following the mass shooting, Australian Prime Minister John Howard instituted a nationwide gun buyback program and ban on all automatic and semi-automatic rifles. To legally obtain a gun, you need to go through a mandatory 28-day waiting period, a mountain of paperwork, and you must also have a firearm license. Australians are not allowed to display any guns in their homes, and all guns must be stored, disassembled in a safe, bolted to a wall with the ammunition stored separately. So even if you do own a gun, forget being able to defend your family with it. It is disassembled in a safe and the ammunition is nowhere near it. Police are allowed to enter a gun owner's home at any time to inspect their guns. A gun can only carry 10 rounds and there is a minimum barrel length. Now, to obtain a gun, you need to provide a legitimate reason, such as using the gun for recreational shooting, hunting, or farming. Self-defense is not considered a legitimate reason for owning a gun. You're not even allowed to carry pepper spray or mace in Australia. In fact, carrying any object for the purpose of self-defense is a criminal offence, regardless of whether or not the object is lethal. So legally, Australians do have the right to self-defense. In practicality, we really don't. Cindy Watson explains this very well in a video she made on self-defense in Australia. If you want to know more about this subject, I highly recommend you check it out. She can say it way better than I can. In conclusion, however, Australian law is a complete and utter violation of human rights. I will be moving to Texas once I am legally old enough to. The typical Australian view on guns is very different to the typical American view on guns. You show an American a gun, they see it as a sign of freedom. You show an Australian a gun, they see it as something that can kill them. A lot of Australians cannot comprehend why anybody would want to own a gun or why America allows their citizens to own guns. Guns are a big part of American culture. Australia didn't go through a revolution in the same way that America did, and Australians have never had to fight for their freedom in the same way that Americans have. In 1966, a poll of 2,058 Australians showed that 90% of those surveyed supported a nationwide ban on automatic and semi-automatic rifles. Not much else has changed. We don't have a Second Amendment either. We don't have a constitutional right to keep and bear arms. That made it really easy for the Australian government to take away our guns. The Second Amendment makes it a lot harder for American politicians to ban guns. Our gun restrictions have been credited with our decline in firearm violence and our absence of mass shootings. However, there are a couple of things that need to be taken into consideration. Now, the information that is often cited on Australia's lack of mass shootings considered a definition of a mass shooting to be 5 or more people, not including the perpetrator. This doesn't align with the universal agreement of what a mass shooting is, so there is a bit of misinformation and confusion there. The gun buyback program is considered a direct cause of our decrease in gun violence. However, the gun buyback program only bought back 1/3 of guns in Australia. That's only a 33.3% circulation. And when you compare the gun statistics, you see that US gun crime was actually decreasing along with Australia. There is also evidence to suggest that the steady decrease in gun violence was the result of an already decreasing downward trend. Even before the 1996 legislation, homicides and gun violence was rare and unusual in Australia. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that despite our strict gun control laws and our ban on rifles, we actually have more guns than we did back in 1996. Now, this doesn't align with the progressive narrative that more guns equal more crime. The problem with gun control is that criminals are always going to find ways to commit crimes. You ban guns, they use knives. You ban knives, they use rods.
Those men raped that woman in India to death with an iron rod 4 feet long. You can't ban the iron rods.
There is also a lot of differences between Australia and America that need to be taken into consideration. It's quite hard to legally obtain a weapon in Australia, particularly because we have such a strong border. We're an island, we're surrounded by an ocean. America is not like that. The UK banned handguns and their violent crime skyrocketed by 77%. American gun owners rely on guns for self-defense and to protect themselves. Every year, guns are used 80 times more often to protect a life than to save one. 80 times more often to protect a life than to save one. Women use guns 200,000 times a year to protect themselves against sexual assault. Why aren't the feminists talking about this? 3 out of 5 polled felons say they wouldn't mess with an armed citizen. Not to mention, 98% of mass shootings happen in gun-free zones. The US has the highest gun ownership rate in the world, yet it isn't even the top 5 countries with the highest intentional homicide rate. Statistics show us very clearly that more guns doesn't equal more gun crime. The US added 100 million guns from 1990 to 2010, yet gun crime decreased by 50%. America would be making a huge mistake by banning guns. However, that probably won't be happening because of the protection from the Second Amendment and from the number of gun owners in the country. I grew up like most Australians, scared of guns, scared of mass shootings, and in disbelief that America allowed its citizens to own guns. I've mentioned to my friends before that I'd really love to live in America because I'd be able to own a gun, and they were like, "What? Why would you want to own a gun?" Like they couldn't comprehend the idea of wanting to own a gun for self-defense at all. I used to be like that too. I didn't understand why America just didn't ban guns or why they allowed their citizens to own guns. But since listening to a lot of gun owners, I have grown to understood their side. Caitlin Bennett in particular really helped me to understand the facts around gun control.
What I see is that almost 3 million lives are saved every year due to defensive use of firearms. That's what I see. I see that 98% of mass shootings are in gun-free zones.
I really do wish that I was able to own a gun, or at least pepper spray. I absolutely have the right to keep and bear arms because my rights don't come from the government, they come from God. And it's the government's job to recognize my rights and to protect them. However, my government has failed to do that. I really wouldn't be able to protect myself if I was ever in a situation where I needed to, or protect my family from, let's say, an intruder. So for those gun control advocates in America that constantly use my country as an example, why don't you just come live here and let your fellow Americans have their rights?